We're going. So you might know that we are in this sermon series called Soul Detox. And I want to tip off of what we're doing next and why we're doing it, right? And I was praying this morning, and I was reading and praying, and the word irrigation came to me, right? And irrigation is just the watering of plants, it's the stewarding of plants and stuff like that. And one reason why I'm doing this sermon series on Soul Detox is I view it as tilling the land. We are tilling up all the junk in our life so that we can plant new seeds. And so what's next is that I want to do a Lent sermon series. So we'll go from Lent, and Lent starts the Wednesday before, the 26th. And I want to do a series on encountering Jesus. And we're just going to talk about people who encounter Jesus. How did he respond to people? And the hopes behind that is that we can better understand how we can encounter Jesus. But not only do I want to preach a sermon series about it, because sometimes I preach a sermon series and then we can just move on and go forward. What we're going to do all of Lent is focus on encountering Jesus, because it's the best way to be watered after tilling up the land like a soul detox. And so I am going to have Bible readings where we as a church are going to read the same Bible passage for all of Lent, each day with Sundays off. And so I will print those out, and you'll have an opportunity to take those. And there'll be two versions of it. You can just read the one reading, and you'll read about 2 chapters a day, or you can read both, and you can read 3 to 4 chapters of Bible a day. Now, I know that seems like a lot. You can listen to it, you can do whatever you want with it, but I believe that we can encounter God, and particularly encounter Jesus, through these readings as we read the Bible. And if we have an opportunity to encounter Jesus, we should take it. And I want to make sure that we are doing it. Also, other events that we are doing. So I'm doing that Bible study at 8:30 in the morning, and we're going to talk through how to study the Bible so that we can find Jesus better in the Bible, so that we can read the Bible and be transformed. But I want to foster an environment where we are continually encountering Jesus, and the best way to do that is together. Not at our one-on-one time, but if you and I are reading the same Bible passages together, you might get something different than I get, and then we talk about it, and amazing things can happen. And so this Lent, we're going to set aside Lent as a time where we are looking to encounter Jesus. There'll be more opportunities to encounter Jesus, but this is going to be our single-minded focusedness for 6 weeks of Lent. So, just so you guys know where we are going. Now, to take the hard turn, this sermon is about burning anger, but what I want to first talk about is pet peeves. Who has a pet peeve here? What's your pet peeve?
People that constantly repeat themselves.
People that constantly repeat themselves. Sean, I think I saw your hand raised.
Having to repeat myself.
Having to repeat yourself. Stepping on crumbs. Wow, this is toddlers are a nightmare for you. It's just like you're just praying for them to get older. So I have some pet peeves. Know that I secretly judge you and I get angry when you do these things. The first one is when you're watching a movie in the movie theater. You're sitting down, and maybe it was a fantastic movie, and you're enjoying it, and it ends, and the credits roll, and people clap. Why? Why do people clap at the end of a movie? The director's not there, none of the actors. I understand if you're at a premiere or something, but I look at this room, I know none of you are at a premiere, right? I understand that. People clapping at a movie is really annoying. Also, I don't like people chewing very loudly. Now, this can be make the dinner table a little interesting, that when I'm sitting there and I hear somebody chewing loudly, my blood boils and I just want to yell at somebody. We usually have worship music playing over our kitchen table, so I do not hear chewing. I also don't like people swearing at me aggressively. So we're in an argument and you swear at me aggressively. From what I understand from my childhood is when somebody swears at you aggressively, they are ready to fight. And so I immediately get angry and ready for a fight. My blood boils over. Also, I do not like when it is too hot. Now, one thing I believe about marriages and getting married is that every single time you look to get married, a person who doesn't like it too hot is always married to somebody who doesn't like it too cold, right? They just attract together, and what you are always fighting about the thermostat, and I'm just like, please let it be a normal temperature in here, because my blood boils. Now, Maria's the exact opposite. If she's too cold, I don't know how you're too cold and your blood boils. That just doesn't make sense to me, right? But when she's too cold, I have to hide the kids in safety. It is very, very dangerous. But we also have situational anger, right? One of the most difficult things in your marriage will be as you drive out and you leave your house, not knowing where you're going to eat for dinner, and you turn to your spouse and you say, "Where do you want to go?" That will be the worst half-an-hour argument of your life because you're hangry, right? We all have experienced hangry. And marriage tip, figure out where you're going before you leave. Or even in the morning. That would be fantastic. Or tired, right? If you're constantly lacking sleep, I know that's been me in my life. I've gotten very little sleep. I get angry easier. Or emotional exhaustion, right? You just fought with somebody else, and now this person in front of you is testing your patience, and you're quick to get angry at that. Or maybe you've lost a loved one, or a tragedy has happened. You were quick to get angry. Well, this makes me wonder, is being angry a sin? Is being angry a sin? I think that as we preach through the soul detox, it's been pretty black and white, right? We know that lies is a sin. We know that bitterness is a sin. We know that hidden sins are obviously a sin. But is anger a sin? Usually, I ask Christians, is anger a sin? And if I've ever asked you a question, usually what the first response I get is suspicion that I have an answer in mind and I'm just waiting for you to answer so that I can whack you and prove myself smarter, right? That's usually what happens. But after the mild confusion passes, they give an answer. And my response usually, if they say anger is a sin, is, well, God was angry. Was he sinning? And usually the response is, well, God can do things that we can't do. Which is very, very true, right? God can do things that we can't do. For example, we can't change hearts, God can. We can't demand worship, God can. We can't convict people, but God can. So there are things that it would actually be sinful if we tried to do that God can do and we can't. But, this is my argument, anger is an emotion. It's an emotion. And emotions are neither good nor bad, they're just neutral. And so we have happiness and sadness and fear, right? Are these sinful? Are these good or are these bad? You might say, well, happiness is certainly good. But if you're walking along the street and you see somebody trip and fall on their face and that makes you happy, that's probably a sin, right? That is not a good thing. It's an emotion. It's neutral. It's how you use it that makes it a sin. But anger is not a sin. It's how you use it. Now, before I just offered this up. If you are feeling a lot of anger right now and want to throw a Bible at me, let me finish my sermon before you do that in anger, right? So Ephesians 4, 26 and 27 says this. This is the Bible speaking, not me. It says, "In your anger, do not sin." Pretty straightforward, but in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. And do not give the devil a foothold. Now this quote, "in your anger, do not sin," you can see there are quotation marks around it. That's because this is quoting Psalm 4:4, and it's pretty specific in saying, hey, anger is not a sin. Now, if I were you, if I were sitting in your spot, my next question will be, then why is it in the sermon series on soul detox? If it's not a sin, why are you even bringing it up? Because this particular emotion, we have to be careful with. We have to make sure that we are paying attention to anger because it can become a problem very easily. It can get out of control. But just to further the point that anger is not a sin, we find in the Gospels that Jesus was angry. One day, Jesus walks into the temple and he sees people buying and selling sacrifice offerings. And they're upping the price. And do you know who this really hurt? Gentiles. Gentile foreigners were being charged extra because the Jews knew that they could get away with it. And they justified it that it was all right because they were not part of the people of God. And you know what happened? Jesus throws over the tables. He gets angry. That's because Jesus gets angry at injustice. And maybe ours should too. We should be angry at injustice. But we have to be careful. So here's the first point in the sermon series, and it's an important one of paying attention to. Anger is instead a good measuring rod of relationship to God and others. This is what all emotions do. They tell you what you are feeling. It's pretty simple. An emotion tells you, hey, I am feeling this way or that way. And so, it's a way to identify how you are feeling about a certain subject. You should use your mind to figure out why your emotions are feeling this way. And honestly, you can begin to identify strong and weak points in any relationship based upon feelings. So, are you angry about losing a lot of money? Well, maybe you put too much trust into money. Are you angry that somebody else is having more success than you? Well, maybe you care too much about success. Or maybe you don't like that person enough to care about their success. It makes you question. Are you angry that you have a lack of control in a situation? Well, maybe that's going to identify how close you are to God and what you really need to decide on how to proceed in trusting Him. Are you angry about sex trafficking and the amount of sex slaves that there are in the world? I say good. That should make you angry. There are tons and tons of people who are sold into slavery, into sex slavery, and abused. And that anger should turn us to do something. That is what I call righteous anger. If you are angry about that, if you're angry about the amount of abortions that happen, if you're angry at this world living in chaos and sin, good, you should do something about that. But let's look further on what we should do. Before we do that, there are heavy stipulations in the Bible about anger. So before we think, I can just be angry whenever I want. No, the Bible actually says you can be angry, but don't do everything that involves anger, right? It limits our anger to just a small portion of anger. So first, the stipulation is we should be angry for a continual amount of time. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. Resolve your problems before you go to bed. Now, I think this is a really, really good principle. I think sometimes if you're arguing till 3 a.m., you might just want to go to sleep and work through it the next day. But this is a principle. Don't let the sun go down on your anger, because you should resolve problems. Why? Because it gives the devil a foothold. When you leave anger go by, the other person's probably angry that you're angry at. And what happens when people are angry? They start arguing in their head. And if you've ever argued in your head with somebody else, what do you find happening? I just get more angry at the person. I'm like, oh, they said that, and they never said that. They just said it in my head, right? It builds up. Anger is like damaging acid that we hold in, and it's damaging us. Ephesians 4:30 and 31 says this: get rid of all bitterness, we read this last week, rage and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ forgave you. So, our anger should not turn into bitterness, which means that we hold something against somebody for a long period of time. It shouldn't work out in rage, where we just cannot control this thing. It's uncontrolled anger. It's just going all over the place. It's at a large and rapid pace. We shouldn't be so angry that it causes us to do something to somebody that is harmful, formed in malice. Brawling. So this is specific to physical fighting. Our anger should never make us get into physical fighting. Slander. Our anger should never lead us to the place where we are talking bad about somebody behind their back. There's no place for that. Say it to their face nicely and work through it. That is what the people of God are called to do. We shouldn't have wrath against people. Wrath is extreme anger. This is one of those things God can have, we cannot, because we cannot control our anger. Proverbs 15:18 says that we should not, in our anger, stir up strife. 2 Timothy 2:24. And the Lord's servant, this is talking about leaders in the church, the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. So we shouldn't always be disagreeing with people. It's okay to disagree with people. But you know what's really powerful? Somebody who never disagrees with you, all of a sudden disagreeing with you. That shocks you. That takes you out of your fog. If you're always disagreeing with somebody, if you're always being the devil's advocate, I love to be the devil's advocate, but it's in the name is devil, right? You're playing people. You're trying to stir up quarrelsomeness. Don't be resentful. In your anger, you can't hold your problems against other people. I would argue as well that we shouldn't have passive anger. Now, this is some place that I struggle really hard. When I'm really angry at somebody, I use sarcasm to say what I really am feeling, right? Like, oh man, this person is bothering me so much, I'm just going to be sarcastic, mean to them, and blame it on sarcasm. I'm just joking, right? I'm just joking. That we should not do. Proverbs also says we shouldn't be friends with hot-tempered people, because that makes us hot-tempered. So, what's up with anger? Like, how can we figure this out? There's so many stipulations on it, but I'm saying it's not a sin. Well, here's the thing about anger. Anger is like fire. Anger is like fire. 15 times in the Bible uses anger and fire together. I'm not gonna read these passages, but I'm just gonna give them to you. Here, just a couple of them are Isaiah 9:19, Ezekiel 22:31, and Nahum 1:6. But this is a helpful analogy because anger is a toxic emotion if it's uncontrolled. So I want you to think about fire. Fire can bring life if it's contained. Fire can bring life if it's contained. It brings us warmth, right? We received the warmth in our houses this past weekend, mainly because of fire, but also because of technology and certain things. You can cook food on fire. You can see with fire. You can sit by a campfire and enjoy it. But just a question, who here has seen a fire that is uncontrolled and felt safe? Right? I don't think we have ever felt safe around an uncontrolled fire. Once it gets uncontrolled, we're like, oh man, I need to get away from this. It can take life. It can burn down houses. It can kill people. It can destroy forests. And you know what's crazy about an uncontained fire? Usually, what kills you first is the fumes that come from the house fire or the uncontrolled fire. The fumes kill you before the fire actually does. Maybe that's a way for us to see, hey, sometimes our anger can kill the people around us before we even release it. The Bible warns us to keep our anger in check. We must keep our anger in check. There's always a tipping point to our anger. And we must be careful of that. If you're angry, I think that that's okay. But you must check and see if your anger is getting beyond what it should. The Sermon on the Mount says, hey, don't even be angry in your heart at somebody and call them practically a jerk. Like, that's how close of a line it is. You can be angry and think somebody is a terrible human being and actually be sinning. So it's very, very dangerous. Anger can infect you, but it can also be a tool. I think usually when you come into contact with people who are angry, there are usually two types of anger problems, right? There are the spewers and the stewers, right? The spewers and the stewers. So I think it's important for us to identify which one we have a tendency to be. So a spewer is somebody that lets you know that they are angry, right? For those of you that played softball, think Zach and softball, right? Yes, this is the spewer. This is definitely it. They yell, they get loud, they fight, right? They are ready to jump up into it. They could go off any minute. I have no idea what you're talking about. My father was a spewer. That's what he was. He would just get really, really angry, and man, you just knew to run and hide. You did not want to mess with that. You would walk gingerly, and he would usually be angry for a couple of days, and you just walk the other way. But you know what's crazy? My dad passed that on to me. I am definitely not a steward. I just tell you what I think. I'm going to let it out. These are people that you know that they're angry. A stewer is a different but similarly problematic problem. They stew in their anger, like this guy whose the smoke is just coming out of them. They just continue to think about their anger and they dwell it in until they are ready to explode. And honestly, they will not let go of their anger. It usually turns to bitterness when you're angry like this. It usually turns to bitterness. And honestly, letting your anger go is one of the most important practices that we need to do. My mother was a stewer. She would stew on things. I'll give you one example. One day in my teenage years, we forgot Mother's Day. Now, this is a terrible, terrible sin. I do not condone doing this whatsoever. My mother was so angry. For Christmas, 8 years later, she gave me a present. It was a Mother's Day card that was not filled out, so that I could give her a Mother's Day card this year. She had stewed about this for 8 years. I kid you not. Like, Maria can testify for this. These are both fires, and they can cause a lot of damage. And so how do we make sure that our anger does not cause damage? How do we extinguish the fires of anger? And the first point under here, this is the last 2 points of the sermon. The first point is listen and take time to process and be slow to become angry. This point is just basically taken off of James 1, 19 through 20. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. So I will tell you, every time I talk about being a good listener, I feel like a hypocrite. I know I am not always a good listener. I probably do a very poor job of listening. And honestly, this verse convicts me every single time. But I want you to see the interconnectedness of this verse. It's not just, a list of what you should do. You should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. No, they lead one to another. They lead one to another. Because you are quick to listen, you become slow to speak, and then you're able to be slow to become angry. But here's the truth about listening. Listening is a discovery process. Listening is a discovery process. And honestly, when you listen, you can learn a lot about a person. It is so powerful when somebody truly listens to you. I'm not talking about people who you're talking back and forth and you already know what you're going to say before they respond to what you say. And so you're just ready to jump in and retort. No, I'm talking about somebody who truly listens to you. Have you ever talked to somebody who hasn't heard a word of what you said? There's many times I'll be talking and then the person will respond back to me what they think I said. And I'm like, no, I didn't even say that. You're making assumptions that I'm not even implying to. This is a really good practice. Just practice talking to somebody and summarizing what they said and saying, is this what you said? Did I hear you right? You will find that you many times misunderstand what somebody is trying to say. That's why we need to be quick to listen so that people can be heard. That if we start to do that, we will begin to hear people. We also need to be slow to speak. Sometimes you can speak yourself into anger. Don't believe me? Listen to somebody rant, right? Elliot, I'm sorry, but if you've ever heard Elliot rant, he starts out calm, and all of a sudden, he's the most angry person I've ever seen in my life. So this is what happens when you rant. That's why you need to be slow to speak, because we can go from 0 to 60 in a matter of seconds. That's why we need to be slow to speak. You can speak yourself into anger. And then, of course, slow to become angry. Are always being angry. It is difficult to make wise decisions. In fact, if you're paying attention to any of your emotions, it's difficult to make wise decisions. The one thing you must understand about your emotions is they are subjective, not objective. So, of course, the things that are objective are the Bible and truth. But your emotions are just subjective to the situation. And if you let your emotions control you, you will be like a boat without an anchor, just being tossed by the waves. You should never make an important decision while emotional. This is why you should not go to the grocery store when you're hungry, right? You're making bad decisions because you're so hungry. You should never make an important decision when you're emotional, whether sad or happy or angry. You should be slow to make these decisions. But I love this part of this verse where it says, human anger versus God's anger. God's anger, not sinful. Our anger, most of the time sinful. There's two descriptions of God that I have here. And one's Numbers 14, 18, and it's just the first part of the verse. The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. Ecclesiastes 7:9 says, do not be quickly provoked in your spirit, for anger resides in the lap of fools. Now, let me just say about this Numbers passage, if you continue reading, you will find that it also says that God punishes those who sin and are guilty. So it's not all roses and wonderful and all that stuff. But guess what? He's slow to anger in that. And so when you feel anger boiling up in, you got to take time for the 3 steps. Listen, be slow to speak, and be slow to become angry. Anytime that anger is boiling up, just tell yourself, listen, be slow to speak, and slow to become angry. I will tell you, it's easy in principle, right? I'm telling you this, it seems great, but when you're listening to a worship song and you're raising your hand in worship and a little kid is crying because you told him you couldn't have crackers anymore during the worship service, that blood boils. But you need to remember these things. Listen, slow to speak, just a few words, and slow to become angry. The next point is that you need to seek patience and wisdom. If you become quickly angered, I don't even know the word I'm looking for right now. If you get mad quickly, we'll go with that. If you get mad quickly, you probably need a patience lesson. God is probably trying to tell you, hey, just be patient. Because he is patient with us, right? We continually sin against him, but he continually shows us grace upon grace. Ephesians 4:2 says, be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. The Bible gives no outs here. Be completely humble and gentle. It doesn't say a little bit. It doesn't say mostly. It says completely. Be patient. If you're getting angry a lot, then you probably have a patience problem. But here's the situation. Being patient is a slow process. It takes time to grow. Self-discipline takes time to form in you. It takes repeated trying over and over and over again. Okay, I'm going to be patient. Oh, I wasn't so patient. I'm going to be patient the next time. If you want to do anything well, you need to do it over and over and over again. If you've never been to the gym and you go to the gym and you try to squat 600 pounds, it's not going to happen for you. In fact, I guarantee you will get injured if you've never been to the gym. But even the smallest person can grow in that strength to the point of being able to squat that much. It just takes time, repetitive time, over and over again. If you can be faithful in a little, what you will find is that if you do that a lot, you will be faithful in a lot. And then, of course, wisdom. Proverbs 2:6 says this. This is the memory verse for last month for Kingdom Kids. And so I have been repeating this verse over and over again in my house. And it says this: the Lord gives wisdom, knowledge, and understanding come from his mouth. So if you have a kid in My Father's House or Kingdom Kids, you probably have that memorized, right? The Lord gives wisdom, knowledge, and understanding come from his mouth. But have you ever been angry about something and learned that, wow, I was angry about something and that anger was not of God? That was against what God was calling me to do. And you responded in a way that you really shouldn't have. Well, we need to ask God for wisdom. And so many times I learned that when I ask God for wisdom and what I'm angry about, he tells me to respond with grace, with love. As you engage the Lord in these things, as you lift your anger up to God, and you say, God, I'm just angry about this, what I think you'll find is that he is calling you to respond over and over again in love and grace. Let me tell you this, God wants you to be angry. He wants you to be angry at the brokenness in this world. He wants you to be angry about the hurt, the sinfulness, all of that stuff. But he wants you to take that anger and have it lead to more love and more grace with truth to people. So, if you're feeling angry, that doesn't mean you're sinning, but you definitely need to bring it to God. Would you stand with me today? Lord, we thank you that in your anger you show us grace. May we embrace the grace of you today. May we know that you are so angry at the brokenness of this world. You're so frustrated at the brokenness of this world. But you sent Jesus to die on a cross to help the brokenness be restored. Let us be all about being a part of your reconciling work. Let our anger drive us to do your will. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.